It was December 31st, New Year's Eve, in 2022. My friend Ryan had asked me to watch his dog, Luna, for the weekend while he visited Chicago to celebrate. I'm 33 and Ryan is 26, so unlike him, I didn't feel the urge to go out partying. Instead, I welcomed the idea of making some extra cash and having a quiet night with Luna. New Year's Eve fell on a Saturday, and Ryan left early that morning, planning to return Sunday evening. Ryan's instructions were simple: feed Luna, walk her twice a day, and keep her off the furniture. Luna, a small husky mix, was incredibly well-behaved and quieter than you'd expect for her breed. I arrived at his place with my backpack, packed with my laptop, chargers, toiletries, and a change of clothes for the weekend. Though Ryan and I weren't lifelong friends, we had grown close over the past few years through mutual connections, often hanging out on weekends. The plan was for me to sleep in the spare bedroom on the futon. I spent most of the day playing video games on Ryan's console and watching TV with Luna curled up by my feet. Later in the evening, I texted my girlfriend, Sophie, to invite her over. Ryan had given me the green light earlier, jokingly saying, "Just don't let her touch my room." Sophie finished her shift at work around midnight, meaning she wouldn't arrive until close to 1 a.m., so I had plenty of time to kill before she arrived. At around 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. Luna perked up but stayed calm, which surprised me because I hadn't been expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a woman standing there. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a hoodie and clutching a jacket in her arms. She introduced herself as Ryan's girlfriend and claimed she had left something important in his room. Caught off guard, I offered to retrieve it for her, but she insisted she knew where it was. Hesitant but not wanting to be rude, I let her inside. She went upstairs to Ryan's room and partially closed the door behind her. Feeling uneasy, I texted Ryan, "Hey, didn't know you had a girlfriend. She just stopped by to grab something. Hope that's okay." The woman stayed in Ryan's room for several minutes before returning downstairs with her jacket. As she walked toward the door, I tried to make small talk, asking how long they had been dating. She laughed lightly and said, "Too long," before thanking me and leaving. Something about the interaction didn't sit right with me. When Ryan finally replied to my text, he was confused. "I don't have a girlfriend. Who are you talking about?" My stomach dropped. I described the woman, and Ryan had no idea who she was. He panicked, insisting I check his room to make sure nothing was stolen. I didn't know what to look for, but everything seemed untouched. Ryan sent me photos of several women he thought it might be, but I didn't recognize any of them. After an hour of silence, he messaged me again. "I think I know who it was. Make sure she doesn't come back." His cryptic response made me even more uneasy, but I didn't press for details. I figured it was personal. When Sophie finally arrived just before 1 a.m., I told her about the strange woman, and she was equally unsettled. As we sat on the couch with Luna, we suddenly heard a soft knocking at the door. Luna stood up, her ears alert, but the doorbell didn't ring. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. Whoever it was, I wasn't about to open the door. I called Ryan multiple times, but he didn't answer. He was likely too drunk to hear his phone. The knocking eventually stopped, and we decided to move to the spare bedroom for the night. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, a weak attempt at added security. Sophie and I fell asleep watching a movie, but I woke up less than an hour later to Luna growling softly at the door. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the wooden floor outside the room. My heart raced as the doorknob twisted, but thankfully, the lock held. Then, a woman's voice called out, "Ryan!" Sophie sat up, wide-eyed, as I gestured for her to stay quiet. The voice called again. "Who's in there?" "This is Ryan's house." I mustered my courage and shouted, "The cops are already on their way." The voice outside went quiet. After a few moments, I heard multiple footsteps retreating down the hall. I whispered to Sophie to actually call the police, and she did so quietly. Minutes later, I heard the front door creak open, followed by silence. The police arrived quickly and searched the house but found no one. The officers suspected that the woman had stolen a spare key from Ryan's room earlier in the night, When I finally got a hold of Ryan, he sounded horrified but also drunk and incoherent. He promised to explain everything once he got home. The next morning, Ryan returned early and revealed the truth. The woman had been someone he briefly dated who became dangerously obsessive. He had cut ties with her months ago, but apparently, she wasn't done with him. She had likely planned the break-in with someone else. Ryan immediately changed his locks and added a security system. While nothing else happened after that night, the experience left me rattled. To this day, I can't believe I let that woman into the house. If I hadn't, none of this might have happened. New Year's Eve, 2019, was supposed to be a low-key celebration with a few close friends at my apartment in Denver. I had just moved to the city a few months prior and wasn't close with many people yet, so the gathering was small. Just me, my roommate Jared, and 4 others we'd met through work and mutual friends. Our plan was simple: drinks, games, and watching the ball drop at midnight. I wasn't a huge fan of big, crowded parties, so this felt perfect. Around 8:30 p.m., everyone started arriving. Jared and I had already set up the drinks and snacks, and the vibe was relaxed. The 6 of us settled into a game of charades when there was a knock at the door. Jared got up to answer it. Standing in the hallway was a man we didn't recognize, holding a half-empty bottle of champagne and wearing a wrinkled suit. He looked to be in his late 30s, with messy hair and a strangely polite smile. "Hey, sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "I think I might have gotten the wrong apartment. Are you the party on the invite?" Jared hesitated, glancing back at me. I got up and joined him at the door, explaining that this was just a small gathering with friends. The man nodded and laughed awkwardly. "My bad," he said, stepping back, but then he lingered in the hallway for a moment, glancing into our apartment. "You sure I'm not supposed to be here? Looks like a fun group." I insisted he had the wrong place, and Jared gently closed the door. We laughed it off, assuming he was just a drunk neighbor or someone crashing parties. But a part of me felt uneasy. His tone and body language didn't sit right. About an hour later, as we were pouring drinks and laughing at one of Jared's jokes, I noticed movement outside the window. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, with a balcony overlooking the parking lot. Through the sliding glass door, I saw the same man from earlier standing in the lot, staring up at us. "Hey, Jared," I whispered, nudging him. He followed my gaze and froze. The man wasn't doing anything, just standing there, holding his champagne bottle and watching us. One of our friends noticed too and asked who he was. "Just some guy who knocked earlier," Jared said, trying to sound casual. "Probably nothing." We closed the curtains, but the mood had shifted. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had ended up in our parking lot. If he wasn't a neighbor, where had he come from? And why was he still hanging around? By the time midnight rolled around, we had mostly forgotten about the man. The champagne was flowing, and the energy in the room had picked up again. We all gathered around the TV to watch the countdown, cheering as the ball dropped. I remember looking at my phone to text my parents Happy New Year, when there was a sudden, loud knock at the front door. Everyone went quiet. Jared looked at me, and I could tell he was just as uneasy as I was. He got up and walked to the door, checking the peephole. "It's him," he whispered. My heart sank. "Don't open it," I said quickly, and Jared nodded. The man knocked again, louder this time. "Hey, I just wanted to join the party." His voice was slurred now, the polite tone from earlier replaced by something more aggressive. Jared shouted through the door, "You've got the wrong place. Go home." The knocking stopped for a few minutes, but then we heard something on the balcony. Everyone froze as the sound of heavy footsteps creaked across the wooden boards. The curtains were drawn, but we could see his shadow moving outside. "Call the cops," one of my friends whispered, and I didn't hesitate. While I was on the phone with the operator, the man started banging on the glass door, yelling incoherently. His words were slurred and nonsensical, but the anger in his voice was clear. Jared grabbed a kitchen knife, standing between the man and the rest of us as we huddled in the corner of the living room. The police arrived within minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As soon as the blue and red lights flashed into the parking lot, the man jumped off the balcony and bolted. The officers searched the area but couldn't find him. They took our statements and assured us they'd patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night. The party ended soon after that. No one was in the mood to celebrate anymore, and my friends left in pairs, unwilling to walk to their cars alone. Jared and I stayed up for hours, replaying the events in our heads. Who was that man? Why had he chosen our apartment? I never saw him again, but for weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching. I stopped using the balcony altogether and installed new locks on all the doors and windows. Even now, 3 years later, New Year's Eve always brings back that unsettling memory of the stranger who almost crashed our celebration, for reasons I'll never understand. It was New Year's Eve in 2017, and I was driving home from a long, late shift at the diner where I worked in Jackson, Wyoming. The town was small, nestled against the snow-covered mountains, and usually felt safe even at night. I was 21 at the time and not one for big celebrations, so I had planned for a quiet evening at home with my dog, Daisy. My plan was to heat up leftovers, watch the ball drop on TV, and maybe call my parents to wish them a happy new year. The roads were slick with fresh ice, and the streetlights glowed faintly through the light snow still falling. It was almost midnight, and the streets were eerily empty except for the occasional car heading toward a party or bar. The silence was oddly calming, with only the hum of my car's heater and the faint crunch of snow under my tires breaking the stillness. As I made my way down Main Street, I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing tricks on me. A man was walking along the shoulder of the road, his thin hoodie and jeans completely unsuited for the freezing temperatures. He had no gloves, no hat, and didn't seem to have any urgency in his step despite the biting cold. Something about him felt wrong. I slowed down as I approached, debating whether to stop and ask if he needed help. But as I got closer, my gut instinct screamed at me to keep going. His posture was stiff, his movements deliberate but slow, and when I passed him, he turned his head sharply to watch my car. Our eyes locked for a brief second, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I sped up, glancing in the rearview mirror. He had stopped walking and was just standing there in the snow, staring after me. I couldn't explain why, but I felt a deep unease, like I had narrowly avoided something terrible. A few minutes later, I turned onto the road leading to my neighborhood. My house was tucked away in a wooded area where the homes were spaced far apart, and the roads weren't well lit. The thick blanket of snow muffled everything, making the world feel even quieter. As I approached my driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and my heart dropped. The man was there. He was walking briskly down the road, his pace unnervingly fast. My brain raced to make sense of it. There was no way he could have kept up with my car unless he had cut through the woods. But how would he even know where I was going? My hands shook as I turned into the driveway, fumbling with my keys as I got out of the car. I glanced back once more before rushing inside. The man was standing at the edge of the driveway, just beyond the reach of the porch light. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his face shadowed by the hood of his sweatshirt. I locked the door behind me and peeked out through the curtains. He was still there, staring at the house. My dog, Daisy, began growling softly. Her ears perked as she stared at the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. She assured me an officer would be sent to patrol the area and advised me to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. I turned off the porch light, hoping the darkness would make him leave, but when I looked out again, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I spent the next hour on edge, jumping at every creak and shadow. Daisy paced restlessly, her growls occasionally breaking the silence. Just as I started to think it was over, I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside. My stomach dropped. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the front window, my heart pounding. Through the frost-covered glass, I saw him again. He was standing in the driveway, but this time he was holding something in his hands. As I watched, he placed a piece of paper on the hood of my car and slowly walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the woods. I stayed frozen by the window until I was sure he was gone. It took me nearly an hour to gather the courage to step outside and retrieve the note. Daisy barked at the door as I opened it, her hackles raised. The freezing air bit at my face as I walked to the car, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The note was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. Inside, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were the words, "You shouldn't have ignored me." I rushed back inside and called the police again, my voice shaking as I told them what had happened. When the officers arrived, they searched the woods and surrounding area but found no sign of the man. They took the note as evidence and suggested I install security cameras around the house. One of the officers stayed parked outside for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. For weeks after, I was constantly on edge. I avoided going out at night and triple-checked all the locks before bed. I installed cameras as the police suggested, but they never picked up anything unusual. The man never came back, but the fear he left behind lingered. Every time I drove home, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him walking behind me again. Even now, years later, I still wonder who he was and what he wanted. Was he just a drifter looking for trouble? Or was there something more sinister at play? I'll never know, but one thing is certain: New Year's Eve will never feel the same.